on March 16th. So anybody who can get to Washington wants to see those hearings, that'll be open hearings on March 16th, and we can get, you know, the room number. I don't know if we have the room number yet.
No, we don't have the room number. We just have the date.
But it's March 16th, which is a week from Tuesday. And in particular, we have already submitted both Pamela and Frank, and this is Pamela Nicholas, by the way, who's joined us. Pamela Nicholas and Frank Anderson both were interviewed by media and have little video or audios, so they've auditioned as potential witnesses before this committee to get selected. You know, we're in the modern world now. You know, can actually, you know, click and then you can see, oh gee, you know, is that a good witness? It's up to them to select, and there's only going to be, I understand, 4 witnesses by the majority and 2 by the minority, and they're probably only going to select 1 witness who's an impacted person. So I have no idea, but one of the things that I came up with, which I think we can get through, which would really be good, if you or anyone you know has gone through this process, like Pamela and Frank and Herb and others should write statements, we can get those statements in. I'm sure, you know, we can get them through a witness for the record. So it can be built on the record of statements of folks who've gone through, who've been denied restoration, or who've been granted restoration after a very frustrating process. Maybe we can get a statement from this guy that Andrea talked about, who's giving up because this thing is so, you know, discouraging process. Through, you know, whatever kind of supportive statement to get through, and you know, that builds the hearing record that then staff looks at, and they brief their members about, you know, the senators and the representatives. So that's all important. So I would encourage people to write those statements up if they have, you know, specific stories to tell in this regard, and we can try to get them submitted. So contact, I think Andrea, I'm going to be out of town from the 11th through the 16th.
Right,
so
but I'll be here.
Yeah, Andrea will be here throughout. So perhaps you should contact Andrea. And do you have your email address to send that to? You
can send it to amiller6210@gmail.com. And then I've got business cards, so I'll just put cards on the table. Anybody who wants one, grab a card.
Now the good news about this is it's at its early stages. It's not certain of passage, and nothing is certain of passage in the Congress for sure. However, there are a large number of groups who are behind this legislation in support of it. And the sponsorship is growing, and it has a shot. It has probably a much better shot than it would in the state legislature. And what it would do, the legislation would restore voting rights in federal elections only, because the Congress only has jurisdiction over federal elections. But still importantly, to be able to vote for the president, to vote for your U.S. senators, to vote for members of Congress, you know, would be able to vote, a major advance. And then the question would be, if that passed nationally, then would Virginia be stupid enough to have an absolutely separate voter registration rolls for state elections only and for federal? But we can sort of, they may, but we can fight that issue at that point. So the second thing, it would ensure that people on probation never lose their right. Restore voting rights in federal elections to nearly 4 million Americans who are out of prison and living in the community. So what this act says is that once you get out of prison, then you can vote. Now, one of the reasons for this is you're telling people you're out of jail, you're going to live in the community. If you want them to live in the community, you want to say, okay, you've got responsibilities as a citizen. One of the responsibilities as a citizen is voting. You don't want them to say, now you can go out of the community, you're out of prison, but you can't vote, you can't get a job, you can't do anything, but you know, you're a citizen. Well, what does that mean? I mean, if you can't vote, what does it mean to be a citizen? You're basically telling them, well, you're not really a citizen, because we know that all citizens should be able to vote, right? But no, not you, because you committed a felony. Now we have to submit to, you know, somebody who's going to go through this little thing that Andrea read. You know, who's going to examine you upside down and decide whether or not you have enough church activities to merit your right to vote.
That you're going to the right kind of church?
Yeah, yeah. You know, making judgments of you as a person just to be able to vote. You know, that doesn't make sense. Administratively, one point that you should be aware of, when I had discussions, and I know Howard has talked to this guy, Mark Rubin, who was the chief of staff for, chief counsel for Tim Kaine when he was governor, he was saying they were having a hard time figuring out how administratively they tracked down when people's probation was completed, because they're out there and they had all these little jurisdictions all around the state and getting the records and all that. Well, guess what? It's really easy to find out when somebody left the jail. That body is no longer in a cell. I mean, that's pretty easy. The Department of Corrections presumably, you know, knows when somebody's released from prison. If they don't know that, then God help us. But, you know, they can just say this person is left, now that's the point. One of the other important points of this is, and this is really critical, is that this law, if passed, would give people no, what we're saying is the person has served the time, whatever the time the judge gave them, or the jury, and now they're back in the community, they should vote. That's nothing more, nothing less. So we're not making the higher level judgment, which one could argue is appropriate for the official looking at whether or not the crime should be expunged, as to all sorts of other extraneous things. But the right to vote is like, you know, you can argue like the two states and like most of the world that why should you ever take it away? But if we say, okay, there's a limited exception when you're in prison, you don't get to vote. But otherwise, the norm should be you should vote. Now, there's a list of organizations, some of the organizations, there are many more, that support on the next page. And then the text of the bill, which you can read at your leisure. Now, one thing I wanted
For a federal bill, it's not bad.
Right. One of the things that I wanted to encourage everybody in this regard, and we'll talk about that, and maybe can we just mention it now?
Yeah.
That what we want to do is have a lobbying day in Washington, where you all and all your friends and everybody else can come up to Washington, and we can do, you know, wander the halls, see Webb and Warner and all the members of Congress, or at least the Democratic members, and just tell them to support this bill. To pick a date in the springtime when the weather's a little better, when there's not going to be a snowstorm. It's not going to snow in April, is it? Anyway, so, you know, I hope you folks can join us to do that. It's a lot of fun. Generally speaking, we'll try to make appointments. We don't have appointments. We just show up a whole bunch of people, and then they'll see us anyhow. At least some staffer will see us. And we'll make known, and then you tell them you're from Virginia, where you're from, and why you're for this, and why you'd like them to co-sponsor it. So, you know, we should pick a date. We want to do that now? Or you want to
We can let people kind of think about
all right, think about,
you know,
think about a time, but I don't want folks to leave without us sort of figuring out, because we're all here now, and there are others in the state that we can ask, but once we set a date, I want to tell you this, that Kent Willis, who is the executive director of the ACLU, has been very active on this. I talked to him last night. He says, you guys set a date, let me know, I'll spread the word. He's working with groups ranging from the League of Women Voters to the Catholic Conference, to United Methodist Church, et cetera, and then he will spread the word to all those organizations that we're going to have a lobby day on X date. So if we just go ahead and set a date, and say this is the, this is a lobby date on this issue, and then of course we can do another one later. The only way to really affect legislation is to be there. You know, you be there either in the district offices or in Washington D.C. Or both. Now, short of that, writing letters, sending emails, making phone calls, all you got to do is call up and say, please support, please co-sponsor the Democracy Restoration Act. So you could all do that with all your members of Congress, with Senator Webb and Senator Warner. You have the information, and just say, please support, give them the bill number, you know, S whatever, what's the, 1516 and HR 3335. And of course, in the House side, with the members of Congress, it's the House bill you give them, and the Senate side, it's the S number you give them. And just say, whoever answers the phone, please let the senator know that I support the Democracy Restoration Act, and, you know, tell them where you're from.